honest questions with honest answers. This is Unfiltered, brought to you by the Emergency Medical Minute.
The Emergency Medical Minute is excited to announce that we are now offering AMA, PRA, Category 1 credits via online course modules. To access these and for more information, visit our website at www.emergencymedicalminute.com/CME-courses, or simply click on the link in our show notes and create an account.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're happy to announce that today we're coming at you from the Emergency Medical Minute studio in the Mile High Ambulance headquarters. EMM has moved into a spacious new space. Maybe I should use another word other than spacious. But we're happy to partner with Mile High Ambulance. They're a local ambulance company here in Englewood, Colorado, and they have been gracious enough to share this space with us. We're excited about our partnership and the opportunity to use this space for events and more video and audio content going forward. So we're back at Unfiltered, and it's been a little bit of a break. Full disclosure, I had a baby. Well, I didn't have a baby. My wife had a baby in between the one of our most recent recording, and now I've aged 20 years in the last couple of months, but he's awesome. But in order to get us back on track, we've brought in who can only be described as the best possible host and interview subject that we could possibly have here on Unfiltered. So the great Don Stader is with us. You know Don from a number of different parts of EMM. He was the founder. He is now the ex officio chairman emeritus. He has a number of flowery titles now, but Don's still very much involved in the Emergency Medical Minute. He continues to move on to bigger and better things that we'll talk about today, and was instrumental in starting this podcast. Don is a dear friend, colleague, just a great human being, and we're lucky to have him. Don, welcome to the next evolution of what was your podcast for a very long time.
Thanks, Nick. You must be a little delirious from that baby, because you've definitely fluffed me up a little too much. Most viewers or listeners in this case would know that I'm kind of just an idiot who talks medicine, and I'm excited to do so. Talk medicine and life with you.
Well, I'm happy that you're here. You've got a great story, and that's what Unfiltered has always been about: is telling stories and spending time with people who are changing the world in medicine in different ways. And I can't think of somebody who embodies that more than you do. So first and foremost, let's talk about how Don Stader and all of his opioid epidemic relief work have evolved through kind of COVID. Let's start in the present day and kind of walk us through what it's been like as you've stayed in touch with progression or difficulties with the opioid epidemic over the course of the last year or so. What's the landscape look like now compared to a year ago, pre-COVID?
Wow. So we're going to start off heavy.
That's right. Right.
You pull no punches here at Unfiltered.
That's right.
I think that the big thing that everyone has probably been feeling is the opioid epidemic is getting worse. And there's no doubt about that. Really, the substance use epidemic in the country is getting worse. And there's several factors. The first is the fact that everyone's been suffering, right? People's lives are either diminished, disastrous, or dire. Diminished is what all of us are going through, that we're not seeing family, we're not hanging out with friends, we're more isolated than we ever have been before. Disastrous, if you've lost your job, if you're looking at losing your house and being evicted, that's a disastrous existence. And then dire, for some of our people who are already living at the edges, who are homeless, they're losing services, like food banks are closing. Housing is much harder to get into right now because of the pandemic. And everyone is suffering. And as people suffer, what people do will oftentimes chemically cope. So alcohol use is way up, smoking's up, and drug use is up. Now, with opioids, the thing that's very unique with drug use being so increased is that the lethality of drugs is also increasing. So before COVID, basically fentanyl was just East Coast, a little dabble maybe in the middle of the country, a little in the West Coast, but most of it was black tar heroin, which is much less potent, much safer, if you want to think of heroin as safe, than fentanyl, just because fentanyl has so much greater range and potency, and people never know when they get into a really strong batch, and that strong batch can be, lethal. And what we've seen with COVID is a proliferation of fentanyl. Fentanyl is now in every state across the nation, and here in Colorado is now much more prevalent than black tar heroin, which is the first time in our history.
Well, at least we're starting on an uplifting note today, as you said. It's important, though. I mean, I think, there's a lot of optimism right now about vaccines, and there's a lot of optimism about, seeing a light at the end of the COVID tunnel. But my impression, based on this and our discussions elsewhere, is that the repercussions of this are going to last for years. From this year of COVID, and that's true in a lot of ways. That's true in emergency medicine. That's true in primary care. That's true in any subspecialty. The consequences of this are going to linger. But I think it's particularly true with substance abuse. And I think all of the dynamics that you just described are unlikely to change in the short term. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that I'm a little more measured in my forecast for doom and gloom. And there's several reasons for that. And let's point to the Vietnam War, right? So in Vietnam,
as we do regularly.
Yeah, exactly. I'm half Vietnamese, so it's a good place to start. I'm alive because my mom was part of the Vietnamese diaspora. So hey, why not Vietnam?
Perfect.
But we know that a lot of our service members, when they went over to Vietnam, used heroin, right? Now, when they got home, not all of them became heroin addicts. A lot of them were using heroin to chemically cope, right? And I hope that when this pandemic is over and people get back to normal lives, to seeing family, to seeing friends, that they're able to leave behind a lot of their substance use. Now, I don't think everyone will. In fact, I do think that the substance use epidemics will be worsened because of COVID, but I don't think that we're going to hopefully we don't maintain the amount of carnage and death that we've been seeing. Just because the last year has been the worst year of opioid and overdose that we've ever seen. I mean, from June 2019 to June 2020, we've lost 81,000 Americans to overdose. That's the most ever, right? We've also, from 1999 to today, have lost over 850,000 Americans. And even with COVID, the thing with COVID is COVID kills the old. If you're over 55, it's the number one cause of death is COVID. If you're under 50, the number one cause of death is still overdose, and it's been getting much worse. But I'm hopeful. And there's also other things, like treatments become easier. We can prescribe buprenorphine more easily. There's a lot more with that telehealth brings to treatment of opioid use disorders and use disorders, period. So I'm hopeful that will also have some good that comes out of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, tell us more about that. Tell us about telemedicine or medication-assisted treatment, or some of the things that I know you're working on with your consulting groups and in your initiatives. Tell me what kind of
so medication for addiction treatment is getting easier in terms of, you can prescribe buprenorphine now over telephone. You don't need an in-person visit. In methadone clinics or opioid treatment programs, people are going home with methadone easier, whereas before it was much more tightly regulated. So we're seeing a liberalization of treatment, which is good. It's actually a good thing that we're making our patients jump through less hoops to get evidence-based treatment for their opioid use disorders. We had, and which then got rescinded, a complete Xing of the X waiver. And that would have been tremendous. I do think that would have been one of the best things we could have done to help end the opioid epidemic. Of course, that got rescinded, but we're still lobbying to fingers crossed.
Call your senator.
Yeah, call your senator. Call your congressman.
Is that what people call a congressman for? Yeah, hopefully it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many competing priorities now, but it is one of those that we and the addiction and medical community should be lobbying for. We should decrease the barriers rather than put them in place when it comes to people who seek treatment for substance use disorders.
Can't talk with Don without talking about drugs. And, it's such an important part of what you do and who you are and change, genuine lasting change that you've made. But it's not everything that you are. You do a lot. What else occupies your time these days, with exception of your well, you can talk about them too. Your beautiful family that we know well. But what else is on the plate of Don Stader in 2021?
Phew, I don't know. So family is number one. That's important. I've also dealt with a, family tragedy as my mom died of COVID. So that's been a big adjustment. But there's other aspects. We still have a documentary that we're pushing out. We have another exciting project we're working on in pain control and how to better advance that. And then I'm doing a bunch of consulting where I try to tell people how to do things better, smarter, faster, more efficiently. They don't listen to me.
It's like BASF. What was that old commercial they used to say? We don't make the things you use. We make the things you use better.
Yeah. But so that's been going too, and it's been a fun way. And then, of course, I'm still doing emergency medicine. I'm still seeing and touching patients and trying to, make a difference that way. Yeah, so life is good.
You strike me as somebody. You're a storyteller. You've always been a storyteller.
Bullshitter is actually
No one bullshits a bullshitter, Don, and you're being interviewed by one right now.
Yeah.
But you've always been such a great storyteller. I mean, honestly, I think I texted you about this earlier today about the first time we ever spoke. You told me a tale. You wove me a story about what it was like to be an ER doc at Swedish, and you recruited me hard, and that's why I'm here. In a lot of ways. And I remember that conversation, and I remember so many stories that you've told, whether it's Dreamland in Denver or Untamed. That's what EMM was built on. Was your ability to tell stories and your ability to get other people whose stories were equally as fascinating and engaging and dynamic. What stories are you excited to tell in the next year? That is when I see you, I'm always excited to hear kind of what that next story is going to look like. Can you give us a sneak peek?
I don't know if I think about it in the same context of storytelling. I do think stories are very important. I think that's how you get people excited for change. But really, it's the base question that I think you're asking is, what do you want to change, or what do you want to commit to? What's your purpose going to be within the next year? And really, it starts with purpose, and it starts with the vision. And then the story that you weave around it is what helps you get from point A to point B, or helps other people follow you from point A to point B. And I've got a few things I'm really excited about. There's a program I'm working on called Advanced Analgesia, which is kind of the next iteration of Alto, which Alto is alternatives to opioids, and something we did a few years ago now, starting in 2017, to just help revolutionize pain control in the ED. And I think we're doing a lot of cool stuff, right? Where we've got a full cupboard of crap that we're using for pain control that's not an opioid, and that's much safer and much more effective in many cases. And what Advanced Analgesia is doing is I'm trying to weave together different things. Three different components. Is one, pain psychology, because I think that we do a really crappy job in talking with patients about pain, and it sets them up for a significant amount of suffering. Multimodal analgesia, where I still want all of us to be using Haldol and Tylenol and ketamine and all the things that are in the cupboard. And then the last one is regional analgesia. So, regional analgesia should not be just something that anesthesiologists do. We should be doing as many blocks as our anesthesiologists are doing, and start really educating ourselves in the emergency department about how to do that, because it's definitive pain control. So really, I hope to. One of the things I'd like to work on is a future that builds on kind of some of our previous successes, that we continue to hone and revolutionize pain control in the emergency department, so that it is as good and as effective as it can be.
I think one thing that has happened in COVID, whether it was surges of patients or just the fact that a lot of, it's just a more involved process of taking care of a lot of these patients, and it can be exhausting, whether it's PPE and long hours and difficult conversations and things that your day-to-day practice as an emergency physician, in my opinion, has just become harder to do the things that we've always done, and we're still doing those things. And I'd like to think we're still doing them well, but it's harder to do those things. And in that, what I think naturally sort of happens is we kind of settle into a routine. You stick with the things that you do well. You try and take good care of patients and make connections with folks. But that type of aspirational approach, and in terms of, I really want to progress the practice. I really want to innovate and lead in a way that promotes things for our patients, new procedures like you're mentioning, new approaches, whether it's pain control or other procedural competencies. That type of aspirational mindset is hard to have in the midst of the grind of the mud and the muck of your day-to-day practice. And so when people like you, Don, have that type of approach, I always wonder where you get that sort of inspiration and motivation from. I mean, is it people? Is it your home life? Is it a combination of those? Family? Is it colleagues? I mean, where do you, I have an answer about where I think you get some of that from, just watching you and learning from you. But I'd like to hear kind of your thoughts. Where do you get that from? Where does that reservoir spring from?
Yeah, so let me think about that. So, I think we've talked about this. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't. I think I get it from my family. I had a sister who was profoundly retarded, had severe CP, who couldn't talk, couldn't walk, was wheelchair bound for her entire life, and my parents took care of my sister for her entire life. And so, I think one of the reasons why people get burned out or people don't have a purpose is because they don't realize how lucky they are. And I've always had that constant reminder of how lucky and how blessed I was ever since I was a child. Because I could walk, because I had a brain, because I could run, because I was good at sports and all this other crap. But more than just that feeling of being lucky, I knew that I owed something, right? That my good fortune to have all these things came with a price, and that price was, you had to give something back. You had to commit to something that was better than yourself. And I've owed it to my sister my entire life to kind of lead a life of purpose and a life where I was leaving the world better than I had before. And, that's doubled now with my mother dying because, she was just an amazing woman. And she was very selfless, not only with taking care of my sister, but in really trying to give back to the world. And she was a great example. Okay, so I'm going to now pivot to the other thing, is you're saying it's harder. And I think that all of us are going to agree that it's been harder with COVID. But I think it's, there's a question between whether it's harder or whether it's more tedious, and maybe it's both. Because it's definitely more tedious to provide care in 2021 and 2020 than it was in 2019. There's more PPE, there's more putting things on and off, but we're also less busy. We're seeing less patients. And I think that the big reason for burnout, if because I think you're alluding to that a little bit, that you can get stuck down and you can kind of, just wonder why the hell you're doing what you're doing. And one of my favorite things about burnout is burnout's not about being too busy. Burnout is about forgetting about why you do the things that you do. And again, it's about purpose, right? I, before every shift, will say to myself how lucky I am that I get to come in and care for patients. What a privilege that is. I will pray to myself, and I'm not a religious guy at all, but I will hope and I'll think, and I hope that that all my training and everything I've done has made me good enough for this shift right now, and that I really, give my best to my patients. And that prevents burnout. If you remember why you do things, if you remember that you're lucky, if you remember that you have a responsibility that's much bigger than yourself, and you always keep the main thing, and those are definitely main things, you're going to do a lot of good. And I think I've done a little bit of good, but I hope to do a lot more of it.
One of the ways that you can measure the success of your life is the quality of people you surround yourself with. And I'm proud.
Shit.
And I'm proud. I'm proud that I surround myself with you and people like you. You know, can only imagine how proud your mom and sister must be of you.
Well, you know, it's there's a saying that if you're the smartest person in the room, try to find a new room, right? Where you want to be surrounded by people who make you better, who think differently, who think grander than you do, or who know more than you do. And I think that's always a calibration, right? Mm-hmm. You want to be surrounded by people who continue to inspire you, who continue to push you, who piss you off, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's ultimately how you grow. And definitely you want to have a growth mentality if you're in medicine. If you're in a place that you're like, you know, I haven't learned anything new, it's easy to go to work, it's easy to do the job that you're doing, then I'd say that you need to start pushing yourself harder. Because there's so much in medicine. I mean, it's literally an infinite field, right? There's so much possibility. You owe it to yourself to push yourself.
Who are those people for you? The people who, when you're in the room, you listen to them, you know, they challenge you. You know, who are those people for Don?
You know, so I'm involved in the ASAP pain management and addiction, you know, I think it's section. And there's a lot of people who I learn from and who I appreciate every single time I get to interact with them. Just because their knowledge base is so deep, where I have a conversation and it's, wow, I've never thought of doing that before. Or man, I wish I knew more about how to do that. And you know, for this advanced analgesia project, I'm working with a lot of those people. People like Andrew Herring or Corey Waller or Alexis LaPietra. You know, or the list can go on. And they're different people, right? That's the cool thing is you get to select what you want to learn about. And in emergency medicine, at least, those people are all typically pretty happy to shoot the shit with you and to jump on a phone call. And I've never really been shy about calling people or emailing people and asking them to teach me or to, you know, help me learn something new. And it served my career really well. And even here just at Swedish, you know, we have a lot of amazing docs, you know, between Chris Holmes and between Pete and Bakes and between, you know, Jared
former Unfiltered guest.
Yeah.
Shameless plug.
Good plug.
Yeah.
Good plug.
Pete Bakes as well as the award-winning Katie Bakes, the award-winning Dr. Bakes.
Yeah. And there's Dylan and there's you and you know, so we're in a really good fishbowl when it comes to my clinical practice. So I'm very fortunate for that. Yeah, there's a lot of great people out there. And emergency medicine and medicine is full of good people.
It's true. Your career has touched on a lot of non-medical fields, you know, art, cinema, entertainment.
Artsy-fartsy stuff, yeah.
In a way that I mean, you know, genuinely, you know, movies and things that you've made that are, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I mean, do you have a story? There's no prep for this interview whatsoever. Everything is just being thrown at Don in real time. But do you have a story from an interaction with somebody outside of medicine that made you change the way in which you thought about something, you know, your career or taking care of patients? You know, I find that when you're out, I love the fishbowl we're in. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm challenged, and that's why I am where I am. But once you step outside that fishbowl, people's perspectives can completely change the way I think about my day-to-day work and taking care of folks and, you know, what, you know, truly innovation means or what, you know, fulfillment in a career means, you know, whether that's tech or cinema or you know, the entertainment world. Do you have a story or a little experience that you can draw on that would share kind of how those people have changed your perspective?
So, Nick, you know, I'll be honest, no story really comes to mind. I've worked with a lot of very skilled filmmakers. I've worked with Eugene Richards, who is one of the world's premier photojournalists, and here in Denver did the Knife and Gun Club back in the day.
Tell us what it's like to
You
work
know,
with him.
Eugene is a very interesting dude. Yeah, he's very talented. He's also very quirky. The whole time that we worked together, I think he thought that I was trying to make money off him, or I was like hustling him for some reason. The great irony being that I dedicated 2 years of my life to making a book that I got paid zero for, and spent probably literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours doing. And it was really all for love of specialty, and I was hustling no one. So, he was a little bit more paranoid than I thought he would be. But at the end, I deeply respect the guy. He's a very talented guy who sees the world differently. And people who see the world differently sometimes have quirks, and I think that's part of, a lot of what I do when it comes to film production, when it comes to, other production. I'm usually not the guy doing the artsy fartsy stuff, right? I'm not the guy behind the camera. I'm the guy who's coordinating everything, who says, well, you need to get this amount of money, and this is the person we should shoot. And, this is the type of story I want to tell. And then just letting the artsy fartsy people do what they do.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between being a producer and being someone who's like a director or an editor.
Sure.
But, and I think that probably to most honestly answer that question is, I find it deeply fascinating to read about people. And that's where I get a lot of diversity of, thought, etc. Whether it's books on philosophy or books on, I'm a big fan of reading people's biographies. Like Teddy Roosevelt's biography is the one that I just finished most recently.
It's because my son's name is Theodore. That's
yeah, exactly. What an interesting son of a gun that guy was, by the way. Was your son named in part after
All right,
Teddy
this is
Roosevelt?
a secret just between me and you and the 6 people who listen to this podcast. So when we were driving out here, Ryan and I, in an RV, just the two of us, moving from DC to Denver, we drove cross country. We went north up through the Dakotas. And we stopped at this town in western North Dakota called Medora, Medora.
I know it well. Yeah, because that's where Teddy Roosevelt used to go out for hunts and stuff. Yes.
So it's beautiful, scenic. They do this. This is a shameless plug for Medora. They do something called the Medora Musical every year from Memorial Day to Labor Day. Every single night, I think they take 4th of July off. And it's like a 2-hour celebration of Americana. And it is Broadway level quality outdoor musical. Folks who've graduated from Juilliard or other performing arts schools in the Northeast have a gap from when they graduate in the spring until when they start in Broadway in the fall. And they come out to this nowhere podunk town in western North Dakota, and they put on this incredible show. So my wife and I went to this Medora musical. There's a Teddy Roosevelt reenacting actor there, and it's the gateway to Teddy Roosevelt National Park, and had just an incredibly special, unforgettable time. And that is the genesis of of my son's name, Theodore. And he is my favorite president. True story.
That is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'll look at that.
We should go to Medora because it is a special place. Special place.
That's so cool.
But anyways, you were talking about Teddy Roosevelt and your love of reading biographies.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, people are deeply fascinating, right? So yeah, I think that's one of the places you get a diversity of opinion is you read about or you listen to stories about people, right? And I love podcasts too, which is part of the reason why we have the MM as a podcasting company, and why we do this is because I find that audio, listening to people's stories, listening to voices, is a great way for me to learn and to be inspired.
That is the exact reason I host Unfiltered. Ostensibly, it is for, the proliferation of information and getting people an inside view into people like you or Ricky Dollywall or the Bakes and all these great folks that we've interviewed over Unfiltered over the almost a year that we've been doing Unfiltered. How long has it been? Year and a half. Mason tells me it's been a year and a half. Time is a flat circle, as Matthew McConaughey says. But the reality is it's selfish.
Oh yeah.
learn so much from sitting here and listening to people talk, and just carving out a special hour of my life to get to meet people is a privilege.
Yeah.
It's a privilege.
It's one of the coolest things about making documentaries and books and podcasts is people talk when there's a microphone in front of them or when there's an opportunity. So I've also benefited from the same thing. I've had people who I've learned from and admired for a long time who I've formed a relationship with, whether that's Peter Rosen or Judith Tentinelli or Mel Erbert or, all these titans of emergency medicine. I've gotten to speak with them and learn from them because I asked them to tell me their story. So yeah, I've definitely been on the receiving end of many of those. And how we've fallen if you're interviewing me. The well must be pretty dry, my friend.
It's been a long pandemic.
Yeah. I thought you wanted to give people hope, Nick. not throw them further into despair.
I have looked forward to, I know your story, but I learn something new about your story every time we talk about your story, whether it's over whiskey at your house or over, a microphone here in the EMM studio. I learn something new about your story. Such an important part of your story, you can tell from the inflection in your voice, is your mom. And I'm sorry for your loss. How did she shape the story of Don Stader? I love stories. I love human beings and the stories that made them the way that they are. And I usually start podcasts with an origin story, but I switched it up because I didn't want you to get comfortable. I didn't want you to have any preparation whatsoever.
Oh, good.
But how did your mom help chart the course of the story of Don Stader?
Well, literally, without my mom, I wouldn't be here.
That's
and
well said.
True for all of
That's
us.
so true. Well said.
No, she was very formative. I think that I was part of a State Department family, right? So I've never lived anywhere for more than 5 years of my life. So moving was a part of every few years. And when you do that, when you move every few years, you find that you're a lot closer to your family. That's one of the experiences of third culture kids is kind of, the catch-all phrase for them, right? And so I was very close to my parents. And my mother especially, me and my mom had a very special bond. And I think it's because temperamentally we're pretty similar. And she was just an amazing woman. Like I said, she was, amazing in many ways. She fled from Vietnam to a country that she did not know with her sister alone and started to carve out a life. She had her first child with my dad was someone who had severe disabilities, but she didn't complain. And then she had the audacity to have more kids and to take care of, my sister. And I thought that was a very valuable lesson. And then at every turn of my mom's life, my mom got by on a lot of kindness and a lot of charisma. I think I have some of the kindness, maybe not any of the charisma my mom had. But she taught me the value of treating people the right way, whether they're affluent, whether they're impoverished, and whether they're from different walks of life than you. So I think that she taught me a lot of lessons. And then most recently, my mom's taught me how to die. And that was a very, I've always been fascinated with how we deal with death in this country. And her death really did teach me a lot. It was a very formative part of my last year.
Do you feel comfortable talking about that? Nobody feels comfortable talking about death in the entirety of American society.
No, I think that it's difficult, but whether it's a question of comfort, I mean, it's a emotional subject. But of course, I'm happy to talk with it. We're just in an intimate room with you, me, Mason, and your 6 listeners, as you mentioned before. Sure, I'll talk about it.
We when we encounter death in the emergency department, to me, it comes in a couple of different forms. There is the most tragic form, which is young and entirely unexpected. The young kid in the car crash, you know, a young person with overdose. Although unfortunately, there's oftentimes, as we know, as you know, red flags for that, and that person has unfortunately fallen through the cracks along the way. All the way through to the individual who, you know, was on hospice and was prepared for this and was as much as you can be prepared for death. And then there's a full kind of spectrum in the middle of that. And so we encounter death in the emergency department in all of those places. And each of those comes with profound sadness and difficulty for family and friends and loved ones. And we kind of touch on that in our own unique way in each of those cases. But one overlying theme that I think I see is that we're never prepared. We're never prepared. Even when, and that's true in my personal life, and it's when the moment comes when that person who has meant so much to you is time is of the very shortest possible time left, there is still a piece of that is unexpected, unbelievable, unable to be processed or fully genuinely understood. Where were you guys kind of in that spectrum, and how have you processed that in the time since it's happened? You know, how do you apply or assign meaning to different experiences that you've had as time grew short with your mom? Can you, in whatever way you feel comfortable doing so, just talk about kind of how you personally went through that process? Because you have the background of being an emergency physician who has seen death.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen it across the full spectrum of death. How did it touch you and your family personally?
I mean, any death, especially of someone that you love, is a tragedy, right? There's predictable tragedies in your life. Like most of us are going to have to say goodbye to our parents, right? Mm-hmm. Fingers crossed, not many of us will have to say goodbye to our children, although it does happen. And I think that it being tragic and you feeling emptiness and sadness is just really part of that human condition. It's part of life, and it's part of the maturing aspect of life. You know, I was never really an adult until I had kids. That's how I feel with it, right? And, you know, because kids have taught me so much, and your brain changes when you have kids, right? There's, you know, you're no longer the center of the universe, and rightfully so. I think your brain changes also when you lose people that are close to you, and different ways for different people. You know, I think my mom's death has made me kinder. Maybe a little less ambitious, but definitely kinder. I think a lot about how to treat people better. So that's a blessing. Now, in terms of what happened, I mean, I think it's a story that's worth sharing. I mean, not that it's easy to share, but, you know, maybe therapeutic. Who knows? You can be my shrink.
Take the time you need.
Yeah.
Woefully underqualified for that. But also woefully underqualified to be a podcaster. So par for the course.
You're doing fine with that. You know, so my mom was very healthy. She was, you know, an extremely vigorous 74-year-old. And she actually did not first get sick with COVID. She got sick with a hip fracture. She was walking with my dad and turned and fell and broke her hip. And she had a rather unremarkable surgery, was sent to a rehab facility. And it was actually at the rehab facility that she got COVID. So just part of kind of just that was the first tragedy, that she broke her hip. The second was that she got COVID because, you know, in medicine, sometimes we don't do the best about screening people or, you know, making sure that people, aren't working when they're sick. I mean, universities do a better job in screening people who have COVID, and the NBA and all these other places screen patients regularly for COVID. And in medicine, we've decided it's probably a little better that we just put our heads in the sand. And you've had this experience, right?
Yes.
You've never been tested for COVID once while working as an ER doctor, nor have I. So my mom got COVID at the rehab. And at first did really well. Looked like she was doing good. And I was actually going to fly home to take care of her and help her with some of her rehab because her time in inpatient rehab was ending when she became profoundly hypoxic. And we've all seen this with COVID too. People putter around for a week or two and then boom, they just friggin' fall off a cliff. And that was definitely the case with her. And my mom was pretty critically ill for around a month, back and forth to, first in the hospital, then in the ICU. And I went out to visit her for around a week the first time she was in the ICU. And I'd say that the biggest privilege that I've had is the fact I was able to see her. Because we know so many families are robbed of that opportunity to spend time with the people that they love because of COVID. And because of my stature as a physician and because it was also part of the same hospital system, the hospital my mom was cared for, I was allowed access and had the PPE gown and everything every time I saw her, but was able to spend a lot of time with her. And man, she was strong. She wore BiPAP on her face for I think like 10 straight days. Had everything that happens when that happens, skin breakdown on your face, etc. But she would never complain, And then we weaned her at one point to high flow nasal cannula. And she was actually able to talk with me for a little bit. And we had some great conversations. But I asked her once, do you think you're going to die? And she said yes. And that was, I think, one of my first, when she was on BiPAP, I asked her that. And she said, she nodded to me yes. And that was one of my first indications. And then, she looked like she was going to survive. She had been titrated heated high flow. We were working on titrating that down. And I left my mom's hospital to go back and spend dinner with my dad. And then I got one of those calls, probably an hour afterwards, that my mom's heated high flow nasal cannula had become dislodged or was taken off. Who knows? And after that she had a respiratory arrest and had been intubated. So I went back to the hospital to an intubated mother, wondering if she was, how she was going to do. And I asked to see the rhythm strip, and, because I know what that is, and the pulse ox. And the saddest part of that was my mother had removed her oxygen and had become hypoxic probably 2 minutes afterwards, but it had not been recognized, and a code had not been called for around 30 minutes. And I think about that a lot. What that time must have felt like. I was pretty angry. I think I was rightfully angry sometimes. But that in an ICU that someone can be hypoxic for that long and be allowed to die was a bit of an abomination. And I think that taught me a lot about anger and about resentment and about how toxic that is. That night, I remember just laying in bed and being like, I'm, just going to sue the fuck out of that. And I'm going to try to get everyone's license. And, the fact that my mom was allowed to die for 30 minutes before I was recognized. And I realized that that's not helpful. It's not the way that I would want to be treated if I made a significant mistake. And I don't think that's what my mom would have wanted. She would not have wanted revenge. My mom, and I know this, ultimately cared deeply and was very thankful for the people who cared for her. The people who made a mistake. an honest mistake. So I learned a lot about mercy and grace and forgiveness and how important those things are. Ultimately, so that was a tragedy. My mom survived, on an ET tube for probably another 10 days. I flew back home, but I kept in touch with her doctors. And, I would always ask them. They'd give me all these reports. And this is one of the big cardinal sins around medicine, right? Is we want to talk medicine. And at least I'm a doctor. I can talk medicine. Mm-hmm. I really didn't give a shit what my mom's creatinine was or what her pressures were or whatever. I cared about the things that meant something to my family and meant something to my father. Is my mom going to survive? Is my mom brain dead? What does her future look like? And, I talked with all these doctors who were, I don't know. And then I talked with a doctor who said, I really don't think this is going to go well. And I said, well, if it's not going to go well, I know exactly what my mom wanted. Mm-hmm. She didn't want to be hooked up to a machine. So I flew home and got off a plane with my brother, who was thankfully in town from Singapore. And I went to my mom's, to the hospital the same night I flew in. And I talked with the doc, and I sat by my mother. We weaned all her sedation, and I terminally extubated her. Not the respiratory therapist. It was, I thought it was important. She gave me life, and on the other end of that, I wanted to give her a good death. So we terminally extubated her, and, surprisingly, she did great on nasal cannula for a while.
That's not surprising.
Yeah, so she, we had a good conversation. She was too hoarse, but she knew why I was there. And she knew why I was there. Mm. She knew that it was time. And we spent a good few hours together. Wow. Now, at the end of it, I think that she became a little too hypercarbic to mentate well. But she was still satting well. And I knew, we'd given her a few doses of stuff for anxiety and for air hunger. But it was really hard to take off that heated high flow. And I was with my mom. We are the only two human beings in that room for hours. But I still needed to call someone to say, is this okay to do? Mm. And I'll be forever in debt. Dr. Warner was the one who helped really kind of ferry me and my family through a lot of that. Mm. And I'll forever be in debt to her because she's the one who reassured me. She said, it's okay. So I removed her heated high flow and I held her. And she died in my arms, which was a blessing. A good blessing. So yeah, that's how it happens.
We could do Unfiltered for 100 years and never hear a more powerful story or a more meaningful story or a more honorable story.
Yeah. Well, now you're fluffing me. But no, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it. And if someone gets some good for it, then it's worth it.
I know there will be. There's a country that's got families and loved ones of over 500,000 people who have similar stories.
And that's the biggest tragedy, right? It's the fact that people didn't get to say goodbye. Mm. The fact that so many people died alone. And I think about that oftentimes. One of the things this has made me better at is calling families. Mm. I think all of us have felt that inconvenience, right? You're just trying to get through and practice medicine and, do all of those things. But the importance of actually reaching out and calling a family member, that's a lot more significant than it was before. Because I've now been on the other line where I know what it's like to feel like an inconvenience. Mm. an inconvenience to get an update, an inconvenience to, talk with a nurse or with a doctor who I know is just busy as hell. But at the end of the line, that family member is worried. They're suffering. They want to be there even though they can't. And COVID's robbed a lot of people of that. And it's a great tragedy.
Thank you, Don.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are we going to end on something happier?
I was just going to end it right there. This has been Unfiltered with Don Stader. Something happier, I think, is the memory that you've just given us.
Yeah. Well,
and what a special opportunity it has been for me to hear it, and for anybody who's fortunate enough to listen to you today, that we're from this recording today, anybody that gets to hear it, what a blessing that is.
Mm-hmm. One thing we originally started down this track because it was about end of life care. Mm. Mm-hmm. And I do still feel like we do that so terribly in medicine. And some of it, I went through with my mom, is that we're not willing to have honest conversations with patients whose family members are dying. And there's a concept in Buddhism about what's called idiot compassion. And I see it as a mistake that's being made oftentimes in terms of pain control, in terms of end-of-life care, right? Where it's easier to tell people a nice lie because you don't want them to suffer than it is to tell them the truth. And that concept of idiot compassion means that you're actually prolonging and worsening their suffering when you don't have the I'm not sure the right term, backbone, when you don't have the honesty to tell people the truth. That's a tremendous disservice. And I've seen it happen time and time again, right? Where there's someone who has a subarachnoid hemorrhage that they've got hydrocephalus, and, the surgeon looks at it and they say, well, this person's dead. And then what you do is you offer them surgery. To what ends, right? Or the person who we all know is moribund, and, we still do things to that person. And, that comes at a tremendous cost, not only to our medical system, but I think it comes at a tremendous human cost. Because so often when a person's in an OR or an ICU or something else, they're not with their family.
They're alone.
Yep.
Yep.
And really, to me, we have to make death much more human again. We have to let people know the options, but also know, hey, this is your family member. Your family member is going to die. And the trade-off between a Hail Mary and allowing them a natural death might be the fact that you don't get to spend any time with them. And to refocus people, because I think, it's always funny. People want to play doctor when it comes to end-of-life care for their family. They don't know what a creatinine is. They don't know what a pressor is. They don't know all the medicines we're doing. But suddenly there's this deep interest in Googling all this shit and saying, well, what if we do this and what if we do that? And really, you just have to refocus. And I tried to do this with myself all the time when I was with my mom in her final days, is I said to myself, I'm here to be my mom's son. Do I have a good amount of medical knowledge? Yes. But am I going to question the vasopressors we're using or question this management? A little bit. I did a little bit. But really, my principal purpose was there to be her son. And that's really, I think, one of the things we can tell family members too, is, I'm happy to be your loved one's doctor. I went through a fuckload of school to do that, in fact, right? And have a good amount of experience doing that. But what I need you to be is I need you to be the husband, the son, the daughter, the family member that your mom would want in a time like this, right? Or your family would want in a time like this. And I want to tell you how important it is for you, for your soul, for your well-being, to be at that bedside and to tell your loved one how much they mean to you. Mm-hmm. To tell them sorry for anything that you've done wrong. to tell them thank you and to tell them I love you. Right? You only get one shot to tell someone that on the way out sometimes. And we rob a lot of people of that shot. So it's made me a lot more human about death. I was already kind of fascinated with this stuff and passionate about it because I thought that we fucked up the human component of dying a lot. But it's redoubled those efforts, Giving people good deaths, a death like my mom had, should be one of the biggest goals of medicine. Not the foolhardy goal that everyone's going to live forever. We've succeeded in making no one live forever. But we sure as hell can succeed in making people's quality of life as good as it can be for as long as it can be. But then when the time has come, to give people human deaths.
There's no more important calling. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yep.
If time were short, what would your family member want to be doing, and what would you want to be doing with your family member?
Yeah, exactly.
And time is short.
Mm-hmm. And that's a lot harder to do than to say, well, they're going to surgery, or well, we started them on this vasopressor and they're going to the ICU.
That's safer. It's safer for us. It's
I
more
don't know.
comfortable.
I don't know if it is safer for us, right? I would have been less angry if they would have told me we made a mistake, right? Initially. I mean, I'm no longer angry. If they said, listen, your mom's been hypoxic for a while. We don't know what happened, but the alarm was not heard or not listened to, and we've made a mistake, I would have been less angry. Right? So I do think that, I guess it gets back to the concept of being honest with people, right? I think oftentimes we try to soften blows that are devastating. The death of someone is a devastating thing. There's no softening that, right? You can give the news in a compassionate way and then refocus on what's going to be less traumatizing for that patient and that person as they move forward in life. Not giving them a bunch of idiot compassion and hoping that things turn out for the best. Yeah. I don't know what more I have to say. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Nick. It's kind of surreal to be a subject of a podcast, not on the other side of the table. So thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about, things that are important. We don't have enough important conversations nowadays. So it's good to have one every once in a while again.
The privilege is mine, and the privilege is our listeners for the chance to share in your vulnerability. It's raw, and despite the efforts that you clearly have taken to process it and to deal with it, but it's raw, and it's pain, and it's such a tragedy, and it's vulnerable, but it's a beautiful story.
Oh yeah,
it's a beautiful story with a beautiful ending, and one that I'm privileged to hear.
Yeah,
and
it's got good lessons. You know, good lessons for me as a physician, for me as a human being. It's a tragedy, no question, but it's a tragedy that's made me a better person.
You said you wanted to end on something brighter, and there it is. There it is, right there.
Yep. Good allegory for this year, right?
Yeah.
It's this last year, this epidemic is a tragedy, but hopefully it makes us better people, a better nation, better caregivers, better doctors, and, healthcare workers. I really hope it does.
This has been Unfiltered. This is Nick Sippis, and we're also privileged to have heard from Dr. Don Stader. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
The Emergency Medical Minute would like to thank our sponsor, Swedish Medical Center, for helping fund our nonprofit organization and make this podcast possible. Donations are essential to our organization to cover operational costs and fund the creation of our online courses offering AMA PRA Category 1 credits. So if you enjoy our show, And if you're able to make a one-time or recurring donation towards our organization, any amount is helpful. Please click the link in our show notes to make a donation. Thank you for listening.